It's time for monthly money talks with Zen Jenn. I am so excited to have Jenn Baas back with me. She is my financial strategist and the woman who has helped me completely transform how I feel about my business and the financial side of things. Today, we're going to dive into budgeting, which is a loaded word, and a lot of people don't. Sometimes it feels very restrictive, but the goal today for you is to see this as a way to grow your business, a way to decide what your next steps are and make decisions about what you're going to do in your business from a strategic place. So we're going to get into that now. Hey, you leader, entrepreneur, business owner, solopreneur, whatever you call yourself, we know you're a visionary business builder, wealth seeker looking to combine a passion for doing good with leading consciously. It's time to shift from a traditional focus of pure wealth accumulation to one that integrates well-being and fulfillment. You're here for a purpose, and it's time to shine your light. So here we go. Welcome back to the Conscious Edge podcast. I'm your host, Alicia St. Germain, founder of the Conscious Edge, where I help women entrepreneurs increase the capacity for what they can hold energetically, emotionally, financially, so that they can enjoy their business, the process of building it, and find fulfillment in what they do. Jenn Baas, welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today.
So in case this is someone's first time listening, please tell them who you are and what you do.
Sure. My name is Jenn, and I have a company called Peak to Peak Solutions, and I help small business owners create ease amongst their financials, whether it's on the bookkeeping side or more strategic side of things. Just come along, shoulder the burden, help make the finances feel a little easier.
And we just did something super cool that we've been so excited about. Today, right before we recorded this, we launched the first financial leadership lab inside of the Exponential Entrepreneur. So Jenn is joining us this year in the Exponential Entrepreneur as the financial capacity coach. So she's running a lab once a month with my clients and to help them feel like make the same transformation really that I made last year and how I handle my finances. So after the experiences that I had last year, I was like referring people to you. And then it started to become a question of how many more people could you take on? Did you have the capacity for?
Right.
And so we started asking ourselves, how can we help more people do what you did with me and a lot of the women in my inner circle, and do it without losing the power and the impact.
Right.
So
yeah, so exciting.
We just officially launched that. If you're interested in what that lab looks like, we are offering it to a capped number, a small amount of participants that are outside of the Exponential Entrepreneur. So you can actually check that out and see if there's still spots available at consciousedge.com/financial-leadership. I'll make sure I link it for you in the show notes. If you're new here, we do these monthly money talks with Zen Jenn every single month, and we produce these podcast episodes every single week to explore all the sides of building a business that affect us as humans. So nothing is off limits. We talk about all kinds of things. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure you hit subscribe or follow from wherever you're listening. Now we've handled the business. So one of the things I wanted to share with you, Jenn, that was fascinating is I was talking to my friend Shannon, who is also a client of yours. And I was telling her, I said, I'm so pumped about this year, about the up leveling that we're doing inside the Exponential Entrepreneur, bringing you on in the lab. And I just said, I just feel like this year feels really different. Like I shed some stuff and it just feels so different. And she said, you know, I'm so happy for you. You went through a lot last year. And I was like, Well, I mean, I didn't think it was that bad. I had a good year. And it's so fascinating because we did my end of year, like year in review.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I went into that call, and I've already shared this on a previous episode, but I went into that call feeling like it wasn't a great year.
Mm-hmm.
We talked. You showed me that I actually had my most profitable year to date. And I left that call reaching a lot of my goals that I had in my vision, even if it was just a certain percentage of that goal. I could see all the places where I was doing what I wanted to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of forgot last year was kind of a tough year with my CPA passing away and my bookkeeping company shutting down. And then the IRS like hitting me with a collections notice that they've never told me about. And I'm just handling it. And so what a transformation.
Total transformation. And even I remember in that review when you came in and you were like a little low, like, oh, just wasn't quite what I wanted it to maybe even feel like. And then we looked at the numbers and just a complete like 180 in that session of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
Last year was a really big year for you. There was a lot of stuff to go through. And the fact that you're in such a different place with your relationship with the money and being able to engage with it and interact with it instead of being really overwhelmed by it is really amazing.
Yeah. And then wanting everybody else to do it too. I'm like, please come on the journey with me. It's going to be so great.
Yeah. So cool.
So you're going to be working with people inside of the financial leadership lab on some of the things we're going to talk about today. But let's talk about the budget piece. Right now, we just met to talk about my vision for the year, what I wanted to happen. And that's some of the work that we're doing inside of the capacity reset that is going to be happening later in this month to help people really reset on what their intentions are. So we did that last month. And now we're starting to have conversations about budget. People are super resistant to that word.
I'm super resistant to that word. I think everyone is, right?
Tell me more.
Budget is such a complicated word, I think. I think on the surface of it, our typical experience with it is like being put on a budget means that we have to restrict and kind of shrink. It feels negative for most people that we have to but we can't do that because of the budget. We really can't afford to do that, can't do this, can't do that. So I do think that there's this aspect where we've been raised with an idea or we've had experience with an idea that budgeting is really restrictive and it's meant to keep us in line or things like that. And so then I think when we shift past creating the budget, people then tend to look at, here's what I budgeted and I overspent, or maybe I didn't hit the revenue goal that I thought I was going to. And so then it starts even more of a shame kind of relationship because it's like, oh, you didn't hit the budget. And traditional finance people, that's what they're really concerned with is you went over budget and you only have so much to spend. And so I think most people's relationships with budget is negative. Mm-hmm. I use the word because everybody at least knows what it means. So there's a common baseline understanding of this is what it means. But what I've come to try to use more is financial plan, right? And in your program, financial capacity plan of how do we craft a plan, a financial plan that supports our financial goals or our business goals. How do we enable ourselves to be able to do the things that we want to do? So that it's a more expansive, empowering perspective than what most people take away from the word budget.
Yeah, no, I think the first thing to say is if you are an entrepreneur who came from corporate, you need to
Which so many have.
Throw out whatever definition of budget you have and start thinking about this as a plan that helps you create the life that you want and grow your business in a way that is healthy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Obviously, I'm in Colorado and kind of a mountain sort of person. And so the way that I like to think about it is if we want to do a particular climb, we will prepare for that climb and we will get a plan together. Like, what trail are we going to take? What time are we going to leave? What snacks do we need to have? All of those things go into this plan for this hike. And so for me, that's how I like to think about a budget or a financial plan. So we think about what are the goals and then how do we craft a plan that helps us achieve them? And if you just said, hey, I just want to go hike Twin Sisters, which is a really great hike out here, and you just wanted to go do that with no plan and no trail and no map and none of those things, you might get lost or you might fall off the cliff. Like, a lot of bad things could happen. You might get there eventually, but it's probably going to take forever. So that's how I like to think about it.
And what kind of condition are you going to be when you get there?
And yeah, you're probably going to be ragged and weary. And it's also not to say that when you have that plan, like I've certainly on hikes been like, let's go off the trail, or let's take, like, we weren't planning on taking this offshoot, but now that we're there, we want to go see that, I don't know, waterfall that's a half mile away, right? So that's where I think people think a budget has to be this really constrictive thing where we can only do X, Y, Z because that's what we said we were going to do. Instead of looking at it as a plan, something that shows us what the financial outcome is going to be. And then if we get into the year and things are going differently, or we decide we want to do something differently, we have that freedom to change it. It doesn't have to be like engraved in stone and then shame us if we deviate.
So last week I was talking about running my business a little differently on a kind of a different calendar than I was talking about running it based on seasons versus a calendar year. And what we're doing at the cadence that we're doing it, I think is so supportive to that, because we're doing all of our planning now. So we're taking our winter months, the time that we want to be reflective of what worked last year, what didn't work, what we want to do differently. And I think creating this plan, this budget for the year, is the part where you're putting in some roots and you're going to be making some decisions to cut away things that no longer serve, revamping maybe things that we do. So I love that we're having this conversation mid-February, and again, reinforces for me how supportive it is to grow your business in this way. So I wanted to ask you, kind of from the what is typically done in budgets versus what we're doing.
Sure.
How that shifts things, or does that shift anything for us?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and it probably has a couple of different answers. So traditional budgeting, you might even be tackling in Q4 of the previous year, so that you can kind of have that plan in place to start out in January. That's probably the most common or corporate sort of approach, is everything's outlined ahead of time. I think in reality, for most small businesses and such, for me, it's never too late. Like, I've had people who've come into my program in May and June, and we'll still put together a plan for at least the back half of the year. So coming into this budgeting season, I think you have a lot more clarity in this way because you've seen 2025, you've seen what it was and what you took away from it, all the lessons that you've learned. You've had a little bit of time to marinate in that. And then you're able to put forth a plan also with like a month or 6 weeks of data too. And so people could say that you're starting behind the 8 ball in that way, that you don't have your plan from the outset. I think as long as you're dialed in with your numbers and stuff and you kind of know some of the actions you need to take, you can mitigate that, which I think, you're in the position where you are. You know the actions that you need to take. You're not waiting for the budget to tell you any of those things. So in that way, I think you actually get to come into it. You have a little bit of data about the first part of the year. You have a lot of clarity about how the last year was. And I think that gives you a great foundation to then really think about and craft a plan for the next part of this year. Some people, if we're getting into this even quote unquote late in the year, we can also just do like a 12-month plan, right? So if you're sitting there at home and it's July, if you're listening to this in the future, we're kind of conditioned to think it has to always be in this calendar framework. We could do a budget for July to July or July to June, right? So we can kind of decide the time frame that really works best.
Yeah. And I appreciate you saying that. We're actually, as we're going through the lab, we're not going to be tackling budgets until April because there are things that like people needed to get onto a level playing field. And there are things that you want to have in front of you and in place before you hit that, figure out that budget. So what are some of those just high level, like what are some of the things that you're thinking before someone creates a budget or to support someone in creating a budget? What do they want to have in front of them?
That's a great question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is some sort of financial tracking system, some sort of bookkeeping system. And that's really to facilitate the preparation of the budget. So typically with budgeting, I often like to reference prior year activity, right? So like if we're going to set a budget for office supplies, well, what do we usually spend? And then do we have any different needs this year where that might adjust? And if we don't have a financial system in place to help us assess that, that's where budgeting can just, from a functional standpoint, become more complicated. So it's very helpful to have some sort of system in place, whether it's spreadsheets or an accounting software, that you can at least identify, here's where the money has gone in the past, because that gives you such great information to build a starting point for what is coming up. So I think that's a critical piece. The other thing that I think is really critical, that again is a little more unique from most traditional finance types, is having that goal setting, vision casting piece in place. And that's where I always start, is not just what's the budget, but first, like, what mountain are we climbing? Where are we going? What do we want to do this year? What's important? Because I like to craft a financial plan that makes sure that we're actually building the business in the direction that we want it to go, so that it has some purpose and it takes us where we want to go.
And you talked last month about dysfunction. So like dysfunction right now and dysfunction that will be a problem in the future, because when we're smaller and we're not growing, it's not as big of a deal. So if you didn't listen to that episode, I highly recommend go back and listen to the January one, because I think going through some of the things you talked about there can also help people decide, maybe from a financial perspective, just maybe one or two things they want to focus in on this year.
Absolutely.
So those are really key things. Today we went through, earlier before we recorded this, we had the financial leadership lab, as I mentioned, and that was, you were taking people through a business health assessment and
absolutely
breaking down what was working and what wasn't working.
Yes.
And then what we're doing is we're looking at the capacity reset, which is some visioning work and where people want to go. So taking the time, these things seem fluffy, right?
They do, but they're so powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I think, actually my favorite sessions to run of the whole year is typically the vision casting ones. They're the ones that I have no idea where the conversation's going to go. Like there's even working with you or working with people where it's a repeat year, I have no idea where conversation's going to go. So there's like no framework, and they're always the coolest sessions because you really get to talk about what isn't working and what is working and what purpose do you want this year to serve. And that's, the combination of the health assessment with the vision casting. You get this really beautiful picture of what do we want it to be and where are the gaps? Where do we need to focus so that we can achieve that?
Yeah.
And it seems fluffy, but it's really transformative when then you combine it with the financial strategy piece.
Well, and so I just caught a piece of a podcast, let me say it this way. And I have noticed a big time hustle culture that gets promoted a lot on social media. And the person was talking about how, even though they made a lot of money, they didn't feel fulfilled. And when you skip the vision piece and looking at building a healthy business, one that has a really strong foundation. And the sole purpose is to make a lot of money as fast as possible. A lot of times fulfillment gets skipped because we equate our value, and not everybody, but some people have a big assumption that their value is based on their bank account.
Mm-hmm.
And that they're going to find fulfillment sometimes in just, this person was talking about how they were taking the actions that should create fulfillment, like maybe like giving back or like really pouring into other people or giving philanthropically, and it felt empty.
Yeah. And you hear that pretty frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why, like, no one told me that I should budget this way with people. I think I got there from looking at people who had built something that really wasn't serving what they wanted. And they had this level of dissatisfaction with what they had built, even if it was on the surface very successful. It was coming at a cost, maybe personally, or they didn't have that personal fulfillment in it. And so taking that step to like, we're not just going to create a budget for the sake of a budget. We're going to create a budget that supports what you want to do and where you want to go. I think that also, it's kind of like if you say, I'm going to go on a diet, right? It feels restrictive. It feels unfortunate versus if you say, I want to eat this way in order to enable me to feel this way. There's purpose behind that. And so the vision casting and that aspect of planning also gives purpose to the budget or the plan that then helps it feel, again, empowering versus restrictive.
Yeah, it truly does lend more to abundance.
It does.
And knowing that you're working towards something versus taking something away, which I love that shift because it's about connecting our businesses really to soul and why we do things. And it's not enough to have a business that's just going through the motions. I think of a soulless business.
And I don't know, I'm sure you encounter this as well, but I actually can, when I ask some people, what's your definition of success? Like, they actually have never sat back to think about that because we have this societal picture of what that's supposed to look like. And it often is that hustle and fancy cars and lots of money. And I think if people took a second to say, well, what is success for me? Mm-hmm. What is that? What are my values? What do I want? Do I want to retire when I'm 40? Or do I want to create a life I love living every day? Or like, what does that picture look like? Because then it's very personal. And that's something, it's interesting how many people haven't taken that second to really ask themselves, what do they really want versus what does like society say that we're supposed to do?
So tactically, there's a discomfort that's going to come up when someone schedules time to step back and say, this is my vision. This is what I want my business to serve. This is where my business is at. You know, looking at kind of the health of the business or what practices you have in place. And I think what I want to name is the discomfort that people feel from slowing down and not feeling like they have the ability to slow down or everything will fall apart.
Yeah.
How do you help people work through that?
Yeah. I think it depends on the situation. I think that it typically all goes back to it's a problem to solve. So then like once we can identify the problem or the goal and the gap, so maybe we identify that somebody actually, their version of success is working a lot less. Okay, that's now on the table. How do we make that work? What does that look like? Is that hiring somebody to step in and take over XYZ? Okay, what's the impact of that financially? So it's kind of like pulling the thread on the sweater. At first, it feels like it gets messier and you're like, oh no, where's this going to go? And did I just create a giant hole? But let's say that you do, let's say you create a giant hole. It's really an opportunity to build it the way that you want it to be.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the power of it.
So it's not being afraid of the mess. And just, it's like cleaning the closet, right? Like you pull all the stuff out of the closet and it gets worse before it gets better.
It does. I love that analogy, actually. That's so much of what it's like. This planning process does feel messy because it is asking you to deal with the tough questions up front. But by avoiding them, you're not making it any better. You're just delaying it and magnifying the impact and probably feeling a lot less fulfilled and happy along the way. So if you can be brave enough to take all of it back out, and worst case scenario, it doesn't all fit back in the closet, at least you know. And then at least you can confront that reality and figure out what to do.
What is the best way for someone to facilitate sitting down and creating then the budget? So they have access to their last year's expenses. They have a vision for where they want to go, which basically I think to some extent drives your revenue a little bit. And then thinking about what expenses it's going to take to create your vision. Where does someone then start to sit down and actually put pen to paper?
Yeah. So my process, I'm sure there's other ways that work, but what I like to do is I like to pull last year and even previous years, if it's a company that has a handful of years runway, and export. What I'll do is I'll export the P&L or assemble whatever financials you have year by year so that we can look at that actual and say, okay, this is what happened at least last year, if not 2 or 3 years prior to that. I do this in Excel. And then I bump over in a fresh column, and using the prior years as a starting point, I start to plan moving forward.
Gotcha.
So for each line, I'm saying, okay, this is what happened last year, or this is what happened the prior few years. Do I anticipate having any new needs this year? Is that going to change? My typical approach is to start with what I call a gentle roundup. So let's say office supplies were $6,200. I'm just going to bump it up to $6,500. So I'm going to assume for my first whack at things that everything's going to go up a little bit in cost, because that's just the realities of our world, right? Things tend to become more expensive, not less. So my first step, adjust for gentle roundups, adjust for any new information we have. I need a new computer this year, or last year I bought a new computer, this year I'm not. So we can adjust that.
What I really love is you're actually in conversation with these numbers is what's really happening. So, because I'm picturing me who's going I hate math, I hate spreadsheets, I don't want to be in them. But what I'm hearing is this process is really putting down to paper your maybe chart of accounts or, your different ways that you spend money, and then saying, okay, what was that money I spent last year for? And what do I anticipate it's going to be this year based on my vision and what I'm creating? So it's really, if I stop thinking about it like a spreadsheet and I start thinking about it in a way that allows me to have a conversation about my business and where it's going based on what the numbers show.
Yeah.
For me,
you're
mentally,
really
I know it's
quantifying the needs. Yeah. It's really just the numbers are just a quantification of what you're going to do. It's just how much is that going to cost?
Yeah.
And it is kind of conversational, and it is something that you get in there and you start playing, because once you have that baseline, you say, okay, this is my first whack at it. And we've established a revenue goal, which, on the revenue side, I base that off of real life data. I don't base that off of, I want to do $150,000 or it's okay, I might want to do that, but what's realistic? What are things telling me that I can do? So I like to be conservative on the revenue side, just because typically we overshoot. Typically we think we're going to do a lot more. So again, that's my first whack. Then I'm going to look at what's the result there. And a lot of times what happens when we do that is we scroll down to the bottom and everybody's faces is uh-oh. That's not good enough. I want to make more money, right? So then we start to go through and problem solve. And that's the piece where it is a conversation. It's well, can you do more revenue? What's the plan? How do we do that? What if we do this? What if we do that? Let's problem solve. Well, what if we trim, we don't have to go to that one conference. Let's trim $1,000 out of travel. And we start just crafting a plan that again is supporting those goals that we have, but it's letting us problem solve. And then that sometimes leads into tough conversations, could lead to that one person. Do we really need that person? Are they really performing well enough to be justified, right? So you're pulling that piece of the sweater or unpacking that closet so that what you put back in is really what needs to be there.
And I want to make a specific note about your salary.
Oh,
like
yeah.
budgeting for your salary, because I think that people build these, if they do this, what I often see is they do it before they pay themselves.
Yeah, usually their pay is nowhere in there. They don't plan for that at all.
Yeah, like the bottom line, they're like, they go, I want to make more because they haven't paid themselves yet. Mm-hmm. But if we actually put it in as an expense that happens as a part of running your business, it's okay if that number at the bottom is low. In fact, it's probably good if it's kind of low because maybe that's a way to minimize some tax liabilities, not a CPA, not reporting as one, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think that those are the critical things that like some people will think about the net income on their P&L as well, then that's what they'll make. That's kind of what they think. And so they don't actually budget for their own pay. Even if you're being paid off of a distribution and it's not going to show on your P&L in QuickBooks, I'm going to add a line on your spreadsheet that becomes your salary, right? So if you don't plan for that, and this is the other thing too, people will chronically say, well, I just never get paid as much as I want. And I'm like, well, have you ever planned for that? Like, what does that look like? What happens if we take you from nothing to 50,000? And then the numbers look really scary. But you know what? Better to deal with that and then fix it and say, okay, so how do we create a company that can do what it's doing and afford to pay you? Because ultimately, like if you're not getting paid long term, what's the point, right? Why are you doing it? So again, sometimes that's the hard, ugly truth that people are scared to see and they're scared to interact with that. And so they just don't do the budget because they don't want to have to. But if you can push through that, that's what opens the doors to letting your business actually do for you what you really want it to.
Yeah. And that was life-changing for me last year, to just see you take my budget and be like, you want to do that? Okay, let's put that in there. And here's what that means you need to do. And now we create the budget, and you always ask me a question is like, what's your confidence level that you can create that?
Yes, because especially on the revenue side, when I'm creating a financial plan, I want this to be something that you would like when we're done creating a budget or a plan, I want you to exhale and say, I feel good. I can do this. That sometimes is different than what we want to stretch for. And so that's the other thing is I want to be hyper realistic when I'm creating a plan, right? If we go back to like that mountain example, right? Like we want to prepare for every contingency. We want to know exactly where we're going. We want to feel really good about that. We don't want to be like really over optimistic about that. So we don't get into trouble. And that's how I look at the planning aspect. So a lot of times I will ask, particularly on revenue, and particularly because most entrepreneurs are very confident in the revenue side, and it typically isn't that
in execution
accomplishable. So yeah, what's your confidence level on that? And if you think you can do $100,000, but your confidence level is 50%, let's not plan on that. Let's make that a stretch goal. Let's make that what you're working for. By all means, blow it out of the water. But if we create a plan that's based off $100,000 and you bring in 50, and we've budgeted off of that, and we have an expense load that's based off of like this only works if you make 100, and the year doesn't go to plan, it's going to be a really, really difficult, very painful year where all you're doing is making cuts and making cuts and making cuts. And I can tell you that doesn't feel good.
Yeah, I like that shift. And that was a big thing for me last year was I am the overconfident entrepreneur. Like, yeah, I could do that. No problem.
No problem.
And I always find I create like shoot for the moon, you might land amongst the stars kind of thing. Yeah. Definitely
exactly.
I've always had that experience, but financially, and I mentioned this earlier in my kind of year-end review, I always came up just this like a hair short all the time historically. And then we started looking at what do we actually need? And what happened when I started working from the expenses that we had that we needed to create the business that we wanted. And I started looking at what we actually needed, and I started shooting for that first.
Yes.
I actually started creating more overflow.
Yeah, that's so common. I think it's because it's realistic and it's achievable and it doesn't feel like this big thing that you're like, but when you can create like the psychology of gaining traction and little wins and then those overflowing and becoming bigger wins is huge.
So
taking that step by step and saying, this is first, I have to get to like that break even, or this is what I need as a baseline. That's what I always want us to create. This is baseline. And then by all means, have more goals, stretch for more. No one will ever be more excited than me if you bust a revenue goal out of the water. Trust me. But I can probably count on one hand the amount of times that's really happened, right? Like I wish it wasn't that way, but people tend to be very optimistic when they're budgeting. And then it creates psychologically, again, it puts us in that kind of spiral of like, I thought I was going to do X and I missed and I missed and I missed. And now we have to cut expenses and now we can't make payroll and now we can't do these things. And that's when it just turns into this very restrictive, narrow thing. So flipping that on its head is helpful.
It is so helpful, and saying, okay, this is what I need. And now I'm going to go create that extra. So I am finding that what's helpful for me is to now work in chunks. And so that's how we are creating a budget for the whole year. But my business focus as the entrepreneur is to say, okay, this part is covered. I've hit this piece. Now I need this much to allocate to this particular expense or this particular, it's not even expense, investment for growth, right? Or to improve something. And so I'm finding that is working so well for keeping me motivated and keeping me in action and connected to what I'm doing. And maybe that's the shift I was telling Shannon about, was like, maybe that's what I'm feeling is different, is that it doesn't feel like a mountain. It feels like I'm just going to go for this stretch.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times where we go wrong, like we put a lot of intense planning in around the expenses, and then we just like pick a revenue number and then we're like, okay, like get to work. That's that. And that feels, it's like the whole how do you eat an elephant thing. How are you supposed to do that when it's this huge number and we're just kind of arbitrarily chasing it and like, are we on track? Are we off track? And so what I always like to have is not just a budget, but I'll have multiple plans that support that budget. So I might have, like, if I have a large team, I won't just have like payroll as a line on the budget. I will have a compensation plan and go person by person, role by role. What are raises? What are bonuses? And there's a plan where we've derived that number. And same thing on the revenue side, where we want to look at, okay, what does that look like to just break even? What do we need to do every month? They've got one client who likes to look at what she has to sell every week. So we take that number and we're able to look at it in bite-sized pieces and say, okay, what do we need to do? And what's our plan for achieving that number? And that keeps us really focused. And it also helps us understand where we're off track or on track.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so I wanted to address one question that we've had come in from a listener before we wrap up.
Great.
And so the question is, how do I plan for inconsistent revenue, like inconsistent profit that comes in, and it's unpredictable? Like, I don't know when it's going to come in. So this specifically happens a lot, I hear, for realtors or anybody that works kind of on a commission basis. They are technically their own boss doing their own thing. Or it happens in real estate too. Like, when is the deal going to come through? So how does one plan for that? Because I think to them, they feel like they don't have any historical data that they can predict.
Yeah, for sure. There's a couple things there, actually. Let me organize my thoughts. I think the first thing that we try to do is look at what's a reasonable assumption for like the total amount of revenue. So if you're a real estate agent, again, that could fluctuate, but okay, how many warm leads do you have? How many hot leads do you have? How many family members do you know you're going to be helping this year? How many things do you currently have on the market? Let's do some math to see, like, what do we think that that's going to translate to? So we try to back into some sort of number that, again, feels achievable. This is harder if you're brand new, but if you have any time in your field, you should be able to at least say, well, typically, if I really think about it, there'll be an extra 4 deals that they weren't even on my radar. And I typically know. So we can kind of, even if we don't have super firm historical data, if you dig in a little bit with people, they typically know a little more than they think they do about what they can expect. And it's not that we're looking for things to be consistent month to month. It's like we're looking for patterns. We're looking for, during the holidays, nobody buys houses. So we're going to plan that nothing's coming in during December. So we're going to look for as many trends, as many things as we can piece together as possible. And then we're going to craft a plan around that. And anytime we have inconsistent revenue, we also want to make sure in our planning, we're planning to have cash cushions, right? So we want to make sure that, let's say we have our budget, and if we just do a divide by 12 sort of situation, if every penny had to come in exactly evenly through the year, and we're at a break-even point, or there's just a tiny bit of profit, that's going to be problematic because there's not enough cash flow being generated to help absorb the inconsistencies. So an inconsistent revenue business is going to require more cash flow support in terms of savings or maybe access to a line of credit or things of that nature so that you can help support those months where the revenue is lower. So it really just all goes back to crafting a plan. What's the information that we have? What are trends that we can maybe identify from prior years of maybe when the revenue tends to come in? Seasonality is very common. I think some people feel like they're the only ones that experience it, but the reality is that most businesses have some component of seasonality to them. And so if we can identify at least some of those trends, it lets us craft some sort of plan and then make sure that we have some stopgaps in place. You know, it's like somebody who's working commission only and it's unpredictable, they will tend to like get the check and then they want to just take the whole thing. And that could be a strategy they take. Or we could say, we pay out X% and the rest of it sits in our savings account so that we, again, build that cushion and have that flexibility. And then if we have truly excess, you can take an extra distribution or something like that. So it's really about kind of crafting that plan that supports the goals. And then what strategies can we put in place to help absorb the time aspect?
So a couple things that I took away from what you just said was, one, you could be tracking your conversion rates.
For sure.
Essentially, how many leads does it take to have this many conversations to decide, because there are patterns.
Mm-hmm. There are.
Second thing is the way that you pay yourself, maybe creating the feast or famine feeling.
Absolutely.
Because if you take it all and you're like, oh, I'm flush with cash, and you go spend and do all that, and then you're like, oh, wait, I don't have any. Whereas if you actually paid yourself on a consistent basis and left some for those dry months, you wouldn't feel it.
Absolutely.
So changing your mindset in the way that you're paying yourself. So great feedback. Great piece. So if you have a question for Jenn, shoot me a DM on Instagram at Alicia St. G is probably the easiest way to get to me. I'll put that on our list for future podcast episodes, and we can answer your questions on air. So any final words? We've got to wrap up this conversation, Jenn, around budgets.
Just don't be afraid of it. I think dive in, be willing to do the work, unpack the closet, because I do think that work pays off dividends when you think about where you want to go in your business and how you want to accomplish it.
And I would add to that if you don't enjoy being in your numbers, and this is something that you have been resistant to, and you function from a place of just being compliant every year so that you do your filings, I want to invite you to check out the Financial Leadership Lab that Jenn is leading inside of the Exponential Entrepreneur, because it is so much easier to do this work alongside of other entrepreneurs who are also transforming around how they handle their numbers. And we have two types of people. We have the I hate math people, which is me. And then
it's also me. Don't be scared.
And then we have the people who know their numbers, are in their numbers all the time, and yet they feel anxious about the decisions they're making around their numbers because they know it could fall apart at any given moment. And you want to change that mindset. You want to feel more peace around your numbers. That is what the Financial Leadership Lab is helping to support, and guided by Jenn. So it's a really great opportunity for the people who say yes to come in and get the guidance throughout the year, not feel like you're doing it alone, and really put intention behind transforming how you feel about your financials and how you lead your business. So with all of that being said, I'm sending you so much love. And if Jonathan were here, he would say, be well. Thanks for listening to the Conscious Edge podcast. Make sure you subscribe and take a moment to be kind and share this episode with someone you care about. Leave a review to help us bring more compassionate leaders building businesses and creating wealth to the table. And for show notes, head over to consciousedge.com/podcast. This podcast and the linked materials are presented solely for general information, educational, and entertainment purposes, and should not be taken as personal or medical advice or any kind of mental health treatment. Please consult a medical or mental health professional if you feel you need such services. Please be advised that all investing and entrepreneurial endeavors involve risk, and the use of the education and information on this podcast and linked materials is at the user's own risk.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.